welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOP-LP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube station at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I am really delighted to welcome Fran Hart here today to talk about the legacy of the Beatles. Fran started guitar lessons at the age of 8, and he played in his first band at the ripe old age of 10 when he was in 6th grade. At 17, he was playing in the high school stage band. He had a number of years in there where he had a distinguished career in law enforcement, but since 2007, he's performed as a solo act, a duo, in a trio, and in 3 different Beatles tribute bands, including his current band, Forever Fab. He also performs a solo presentation called A Cultural and Historical Reflection of the 1962 The Music of the Beatles. So he's the perfect person to talk to us about the Beatles legacy. So Fran, first of all, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time to visit the morning show.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, I can't wait. Fran, when did you first become aware of the Beatles? And what did you think of them? Was it love at first sight?
Well, of course, I think I was part of the vast majority of people that watched them February 9th, 1964, that Sunday night on Ed Sullivan, with our parents and our brothers and sisters. And I'm not sure what I thought of them at the time, except I thought they were cool. I know my mother said they're dirty and you're not going to grow your hair like that. So, of course, everybody wanted to grow their hair and play the guitar or the drums after that. So we were very influenced by that very special night in 1964.
Yeah. It was the first time I saw them too, Fran, and I remember it distinctively, both the Beatles and how, in retrospect, they are so clean-cut looking.
Yes.
With what now is relatively short hair and those kind of amazing, very clean-cut matching suits.
Right.
So it's interesting to remember how shocked people were and how degenerate they thought their long hair was at the time. Certainly in retrospect, they look downright clean cut. But the other thing, of course, I remember was just how wild the reception was, especially among young people. There were those scenes of girls looking like just hysterical at the Ed Sullivan show. So anyway, when and why did you launch Forever Fab, your Beatles tribute band?
Well, I was playing up in the Main Street Cafe in Groton for a while, like once a month. I wasn't getting paid. I just got a free meal. But the guy there, Bob Wright, he was a great guy. He would go on to run, I think, the Groton Summer Concert Series for a while. And it was just a fun thing to do. And I would, of course, be heavily, my set list was heavily laden with Beatles music. So at some point, my bandmates now, 2 of my bandmates, Kevin Dooley and Bob Hensman, who were also classmates of mine back at Burlington High School, came up one night to play along with me. And they had been in bands their whole lives. And they were in a classic rock band called Four on the Floor with 2 other guys. So I invited them to play with me. And of course, they're great musicians, great singers. Doesn't take much for them to figure out what part to sing. And we had a nice night. So a little while after that, Bob came to me and said, we're starting a Beatles side project. Would you be interested? And of course, I was very interested, but I was also shocked that they wanted me to be in it because their musicianship is way up here and mine's not at that level. But I said, yeah, I mean, if you want me. He says, well, the other night when we were there, we kind of auditioned. There was an audition. You didn't know it at the time, but it was an audition, and we want you to be in the band. So that was awesome. And that was so in 2012, that was, and in late 2012, we started our rehearsals and getting together. And by January of 2013, I think, was our first gig together. So we've been doing it since then. Same 4 guys. I didn't mention our 4th guy. His name is Phil Donovan. He's a great guitarist. And We're busier than ever.
Wow.
This summer, we only have 40 days of actual time due to other commitments. We're
Yeah.
playing 31 shows in those
Oh,
40.
wow.
And most of our shows are kind of concerts on the common, concerts on the green, that type of thing.
Yeah.
We have a few restaurant club shows and some other ones, but mostly we're outside, which is really nice in the
Yeah.
summer.
Well, so the demand is clearly there.
Yeah, because there are other Beatle bands,
Uh-huh.
and we're not exactly spring chickens anymore. So there are younger bands that actually put on the wigs and
Ah,
dress like them and try to do the shtick, the
yeah.
accent and all that. We don't try to do that.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see 68-year-old guys in wigs uh, trying to pretend like they're the Beatles. What we do try is to make the music as authentic as possible.
Yeah.
And I think we're known really for our vocal abilities because
Yeah.
everybody sings. Two guys in particular, Bob and Kevin, are kind of our lead singers. But when we do harmonies together, it sounds really good, and we work hard on everybody getting the right part. And so we let the younger guys take the other gigs, that the people that want the shtick and the appearance and everything, and we're happy to play the music. So
Well, the music is the main thing.
yeah.
So, um, in fact, I wanted to find out from you, Fran, because I know that you research and talk about this regularly. But what do you see as the significant Beatles legacy on rock and roll?
Well, I do a whole hour, and sometimes it's not enough just on that topic.
Yeah.
So the big thing is they not only sang and performed the music, but they wrote their own songs.
Yeah.
And I think the story goes that George Martin and Brian Epstein came down to them one day in the studio. The plan was to get a #1 hit over in England and then come to America. And they came into the studio and they said, "Boys, we've got this great song for you. We think it's going to be a #1." And the Beatles looked at them and said, "Well, wait a minute. We're not going to record other people's
Mm,
songs. We're going to write our own."
yeah.
And they said, "Well, no, no, no. That's not the way it happens. We got this beautiful publishing house, professional writers. They're going to craft the songs for you. All you have to do is play and sing them." And they said, "No, no, 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 no. That's not the way we do it. We're going to
Mhm,
sing and write and play our own songs."
mhm,
So they eventually convinced them to record at least a demo of the song that they had in mind. And they were right. The song becomes a #1 hit, but not for the Beatles because they never release it. But for Jerry and the Pacemakers, called "How
mm.
Do You Do It?" Big
Oh,
#1 song. And they basically said, "Hey, that's great. We love Jerry. He's a good mate, good friend of ours. But we're still going to write our own songs." And
yeah.
of course, we know the rest of the story. As
Yeah.
Paul Harvey used to say, they come back with a couple of songs. They write "Please Please Me." Uh,
Hmm.
it goes to #1 on 2 of the 3 charts in England, and only makes #2 on the 3rd chart, and that was considered the official chart. So
Mm,
they don't get the #1 with that, but then they go back and do "From Me to You," and they get the
mhm,
#1 over there, and then they come to America.
mhm.
So that's their, I think, one of their most important legacies for music. But they had so many. They weren't afraid to use um, interesting, untried instruments. For example, on Norwegian Wood, it's the first time we
Mhm.
hear a Indian sitar on a
Mm.
pop music song in America. They started arena rock, really. They sell out Shea Stadium in 17 minutes back in the time when there was no internet.
Oh,
17
wow.
and really, I think they started music videos. Um, when they stopped touring, they would still want to be in touch with the fans, and they would send what they call promotional films
Mm.
to Ed Sullivan and Dick Cavett and others. And as a kid at that time, I'd look like in the TV guide, "Oh, the Beatles are going to be on Dick Cavett tonight. I can't wait." And of course, they would save it till the end, and then Dick Cavett would say something like, "Now here are the Beatles," and oh, it's just a movie. A little
Yeah.
disappointed. Sometimes they would actually play. Sometimes they would just lip sync. Sometimes it would be just silliness. They just goof off, to the music. So, but they really started that. They
Mhm,
called it promotional films, but they were videos. I
mhm,
think the only one that predates them might be Ricky Nelson,
mm.
because he was on the Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet with his
Yeah.
brother. and his mother and his father. And his father ran that whole thing, and they were trying to promote Ricky's musical career as well. So sometimes at the end of that show, you'd see him singing to a bunch of teenagers. But that was a kind of a very narrow use of the video, not like the Beatles did. And I think that they really changed that whole thing. And one more thing that comes to mind, the album, before the Beatles, for the most part, we would walk into record stores. Maybe some of the people listening just won't know what a record store was, but we could actually walk into a store and on the wall, you'd see the top 50, let's say, all the 45s. And you say, I want number 12 and number 17 and number 43, because you picked and chose the ones you wanted to hear. Well, when the Beatles came, everybody wanted all their songs.
Yeah.
So the album they elevate the status of the album to a place where it never was before. And now the album became the thing. And that changed the whole way music was marketed from then on. The album became the important thing. So, and there's other things that they influence, but those are some of the major things off the top of my head.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting, Fran. One of the things that you talked about that stands out to me is that they stayed true to what they understood their mission to be, and that was to write their own songs. And so there was an authenticity to their music from the get-go that I think people appreciated and admire still very much to this day, and will always admire, because their songs are terrific.
Right, yeah.
And the other thing is that you talk about the kind of like the early version of a music video, and that meant that they were developing, I guess you could call it a personal connection with their community, created a community of fans, and kind of showed, respect for their fan base by creating little nuggets, little videos, which meant that the fans could stay in touch with them. And certainly, when I was in high school, a very popular thing to do, for the girls anyway, was to write stories that featured usually, well, all the Beatles, but with one in particular, whoever they had the biggest crush on,
Really?
and themselves. And so I think people felt it as passionately as they did about the Beatles, because it almost felt like you knew them and people had their favorite Beatles.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So it's really interesting. And I also, thought it was interesting what you said about their innovation with using different instruments and creating different sounds, like the sitar on Norwegian Wood, which is such a great song. So what about, their impact on the recording industry?
Well, I think, again, the big thing was that they changed the status of the album to a much
which
elevated.
is huge.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in recording generally, I mean, when they stopped touring, they spent all their time in the studio, and they learned all kinds of tricks from George Martin and Jeff Emmerich, the engineer, and others, of how to make things that were musical that they couldn't really even perform live if they wanted to. They were so adept at getting the sounds they want. They learned how to cut up tape. They used to use physical tape so they could cut it and reorder it and play it backwards if they wanted to. There were all kinds of interesting sound effects that they were able to get out of that. And they were masters at knowing the sound they wanted and then trying to figure out how to get it. So a couple of examples, that very kind of distorted introduction to Revolution that is so identifiable. They couldn't get that sound. And as you can imagine, they're on the recording studio floor and they've got their instruments plugged into the wall, and it gets routed up to the control room, and the engineers can control that signal so that it doesn't overload and hurt the equipment. Well, the story goes anyway that they couldn't get the sound they were looking for, that real harsh, gritty sound. So they see the engineers leave, and I think it was John says, "Come on, guys, grab your guitars and your cables. We're going up there." So they went up to the engineering console room, and they, instead of going into the wall on the floor, the wall jacks on the floor, now they're going directly into the recording console itself. So and they overload it to get that real distorted sound. They're putting at risk, who knows how many hundreds of thousands of dollars at that time, or millions of dollars that was worth. The engineers, I don't think, would have looked kindly upon that, because
Probably not.
they bypassed all the safeguards, but they
Yeah.
knew. The thing is, they knew what they wanted,
Yeah.
and they couldn't just push a button to get it. They had to figure out, and John says, oh, if we go up there and overload that, we could probably get that sound. Now, in 2023, and certainly before, but not at the time of the Beatles, we have boxes. Phil made he and I a box that we sit on in front of us on the ground. It's got foot switches and 5 knobs. And so when we want to play this live, we don't have to figure it out. All we do is we turn our amp down to 0, so it's basically off, but we turn all the knobs on the box all the way up, and the same thing on our guitar, all the knobs all the way up. Now, when you go to the amplifier and you just crack it a tiny bit, it starts humming and buzzing, and we know we've got that sound. It's easy for us or any other band to do it, but they knew what they wanted and how to get it at a time when that technology wasn't available.
Yeah.
And so they were so ahead of their time, and they could not have replicated it live in concert a lot of the stuff that they were writing, because you'd have to bring engineers and sound effects and a 64-piece orchestra and everything else. They just knew how to do it.
Yeah.
That's why we were always blown away when anything new came out by them, because it was always different.
Yeah. Yeah, they continued to innovate over the course of their careers. Well, one of the other things the Beatles are associated with, I wanted to ask you your thoughts about, are the whole idea of youth culture as a separate culture. And that had something also to do with the kinds of values and ideals that are associated with the Beatles and with the youth culture that they formulated. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how you see their impact on youth culture in the U.S. and really around the world.
Well, yeah, it starts on the night of Ed Sullivan, that February 9th, 1964. The obvious thing everybody looked at was the hair. And I totally agree with you. Looking back on it now, it seems pretty tame. Yeah. I know in the 70s, I had much longer hair than they did. So, but the kids wanted to be like the Beatles. What the Beatles did was what they wanted to do. So they go to India and they come back with paisley shirts, bright colored outfits, Nehru jackets, the boots, everything. Kids want to dress like them. Of course, the hair. Everybody wants to play, the boys anyway, want to play either guitar or drums. And the girls, as you pointed out, were fighting over who was the cutest Beatle and who they liked the best. Oh no, Ringo's better than George, all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
But there were more serious ramifications, I suppose. The Beatles were honest about their drug use. So I usually, in my presentation, I kind of asked this rhetorically. I don't know what the answer is, but did that affect kids who said, well, if drugs are good enough for Paul or George or John or Ringo, they're good enough for me. So did they influence kids' decision to try drugs? I think probably the obvious answer is certainly some. How far that spread, I don't know. But the kids, we're going into the 70s and the whole hippie thing. The Beatles were professing, peace and love.
Yes.
Almost from the get-go. And John particularly was a great anthem writer. He wrote Give Peace a Chance. He wrote All You Need Is Love. He wrote Imagine,
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that the people that were telling us to live together harmoniously and try to get along and love one another were the people that were getting assassinated. John Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and of course later John, and there were others. So I think they had undeniable influence on the kids and how the kids reacted going forward.
Yeah. And I think people associate the Beatles today, of course, from that psychedelic phase that you were referencing. They also, George in particular, is associated with Maharishi Mahesh yoga and meditation. And I think they introduced that as an influence for young people, as well as a kind of idealism, as you were referencing about peace and love. So, that's one of the things I remember most fondly about them, especially John, as you say, and of course his anthem Imagine as well. Well, I'm curious to find out, Fran, at your concerts, what are the most requested songs, if it's fair to ask?
Yeah. So I think it'd be interesting to know how we pick our songs. So in 2012, we're trying to put a song list, a set list together. What songs are we going to play? There's 217, if I counted correctly, original songs. And then all the covers they did, you know, Please Mr. Postman and Honey Don't, and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, all that. We tend not to do those as much. We like to do their original songs. So we're throwing songs out there. And I remember saying, well, how about Yellow Submarine? And I think it was Kevin said, nah, nobody's going to want to hear that. Well, it turns out that not Penny Lane, not Let It Be, not Hello, Goodbye. Yellow Submarine's our most requested song. Every concert pretty much since we started. And it's not just kids, it's adults too. I think it's a fun song. It's easy to sing along to. And I get to sing it, so I'm happy.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But the songs, so we put together a set list, and the goal was to add a few songs each year. We only practice one day a year, rehearse one day a year. So we learn our parts at home when we come together at Bob's house typically, and we spend a long Sunday, 5 or 6 hours, and we try to make sure everything is right in timing and harmonies. Because we've been playing these songs since we were kids, so we know the songs pretty well. So anyway, we put together a set list. So we're supposed to play up in Bedford, New Hampshire, and it's a very cloudy, threatening kind of evening, and they decide to move us inside. Well, whenever you move people or a band from outside to inside, you lose 85% of the audience because they just go. Anyway, they put us in this old, beautiful old town hall. And we had maybe 30 people come in, sat down while we were setting up, and they were going to listen to us. So we're just about ready to play. And all right, what are we going to start with? And Phil says, you know what? He's got the set list in his hand. Why don't we just give this to the audience and let them tell us what they want to hear? Oh, okay. So he gives a couple of set lists out, and they pass it around. They start yelling out, well, play this, play that. And it was so well received that ever since that day, every show that we do is by request.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that engages the audience and makes them, you know, they anticipate, oh, they're going to play my song. I haven't heard that song for a long time. Sometimes they'll try to stump us with obscure deep cuts. You know, we don't know every song cold, that's for sure. But we know 90% of them, and we fake another 5%. Yeah, so that's what we do. And Kevin's significant other, Denise, is usually there, and we tell them, you know, go see Denise. She'll take your request and she'll relay it to us up on the stage, just with an app. And Kevin will look and say, oh, somebody wants to hear, you know, Penny Lane, and we'll just do it. So we never know what we're going to play in what order, but we do know pretty much what people are going to ask for. The songs always ask, besides Yellow Submarine, you always get Let It Be, and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and all that twist and shout. But sometimes they'll try to stump us and come up with something weird like You Know My Name, Look Up the Number, which is just a nonsense song. We don't play that. But yeah, by and large, we give the people what they want. So that's kind of fun. And it just has its origins in that fateful night up in Bedford, New Hampshire, when it was supposed to be. And as it turned out, of course, once we set up, the skies cleared. It was a beautiful night, but too late to go back outside. But it was significant in the way that we operated from then on.
Well, it sounds like just really fun, and it makes it very spontaneous, and it makes the audience feel this extra degree of participation with you.
Yes, exactly.
It was a fateful night in Bedford.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm curious, is it a mix of generations? You mentioned kids and adults, so is it a variety of ages that come to your concerts?
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. I say that they have fans in all generations, and it's really true. You know, the people my age, our age, so we're all mid to late 60s now, and we have kids in our, you know, 30s and 20s, some of us. You know, they were influenced by their parents playing the music all the time. They got to like it. And we've gone to places where there's a kid 3 or 4 years old singing along, or they'll actually come up and say, can you play Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds?
I love that.
So one night, this was in Mendon, I think we were playing, because I remember we were on the lake, and there was a mother with a couple of kids, and this little one came up and asked for that. I think Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. So after the show, I went out because we usually talk to people afterwards, and I said, "How does your daughter know the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds?" Says, I'm going to forget the name of the show here, but there's a show on Netflix. I think it was on Netflix, where each episode is based on a Beatles song. The Beatles don't play it, but somebody who is a pop star today, like Pink or somebody like that, sings the song, and the whole song, the whole episode of the cartoon is based upon that, whatever the theme of the song is. So now they have another way to get new fans, involved. And it's about bugs in the yard. So I'm trying to remember what the name the show is. Maybe it'll come to me as I sit here, but so it just perpetuates, because the music is going to live forever, just like Bach and Beethoven and everybody else.
So. The legacy continues, Fran.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm curious to find out, it's gotten a good bit of press recently, but Paul McCartney has announced that he's going to use artificial intelligence to create what he's calling the last Beatles record. And I'm just curious to find out, what do you think about that endeavor?
I know some people were saying kind of like, let it be, if you pardon the pun. Just, we've got, we know the Beatles, but I'm all for it. Anything that we can get out of the Beatles before, Paul just turned 81, I think yesterday or the day before, and Ringo's going to be 83. These guys, those two guys are still with us and still playing music and still touring and all that. And if we can get one more song out of them, I'm happy. I know artificial intelligence is a little scary, and it's getting some bad press lately, but there are good ways to use it. And if they can extract John's voice cleanly of that demo song that he did, I say go for it. Yeah, I'll be happy to hear another Beatles song.
Okay, fair enough. Do you have a personal favorite Beatles song yourself, Fran? Or is it too hard to pick?
Yeah, it's like your kids. It's hard to pick. In the moment, if I play a song that I haven't listened to for a while, I say, oh my God, is that good? See, the beauty of the Beatles was they made simple songs, or they made difficult things sound simple. And in a lot of ways they were, but they were complicated simple. And that's why when I said people wanted all their tunes, people know the non-hits, the things that were on albums. And of course, when we grew up, we actually listened to albums, and we had to physically pretty much listen to it in the order and then flip the album over and listen to the order. So sometimes when we're playing up on stage, we'll play a song, and Bob and I might look at each other and start singing the next song that we know would be on the album, because we were hearing the sequence. That doesn't happen today because of MP3 and all.
Right.
But I guess if I had to pick an album, I would pick Abbey Road. Now, that was their last recorded album. I just thought they were getting better and better. The album is loaded with great songs, and it shows George Harrison coming to the fore with arguably two of his three best songs, with Here Comes the Sun and Something. And poor George never got the respect he deserved. Someone as important as Frank Sinatra, who loved the song, said it was his favorite Lennon-McCartney composition. Well, Lennon McCartney didn't write it, George did. And of course, we the exception to our request songs policy is we open the show with two songs of our choosing, just to get people going. And then we always close the show with the Golden Slumbers medley, which was the last set of tunes on Abbey Road, which is a beautiful piece of music. It's up and down, it's fast, it's slow, it's ballady, it's yelling, it's rock and roll, everything you can want, and it's a great way to end a show. So we always end that way. But in between, there's other great songs and riffs like She Said, She Said. You don't hear that very often, but it's a great riff. And they had no clunkers. Even the crappiest song they did was good. So it's hard to pick a favorite, but there's a lot of great ones.
Forever fab.
Yes, they are.
Well, it's been so much fun to talk with you about the Beatles and to learn from you about the legacy and some really good stories. I did not know that about how they really started albums, which certainly were with us. When vinyl was with us, albums were with us in that way. So, Fran, thank you so much. I want to ask you now, if people want to learn more about your band or what your gig lineup is for the summer, I believe you have a website. Could you give us the URL for that?
Yeah, so www, of course. The middle part is the numeral 4 with the words ever and fab all concatenated. So it's the numeral 4 ever fab.net. So we're not .com, we're .net. And on that website, you can see videos and listen to audio. You can see our schedule. I think we start July 11th, I think, in Raynham, and we're all over the place. We're up in Gloucester, in Burlington, and way out in Brookfield, and down in Braintree. We go all over the place. So 31 shows in 40 days is gonna be kind of a record for us in terms of percentage of nights off that we don't have. So
Well, you're going to have a busy but hopefully really fun summer. So it sounds great. Thank you so much, Fran. It's just been really fun to talk to you. It's always fun to remember the Beatles, and it's always fun to listen to their music. And it's been really wonderful to learn new things about their legacy from you today. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Well, that's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Till then, everybody, be well. Pick out a Beatles song and listen to it. You'll have a good time. Bye, everybody.